Hi, folks. I decided to come out with a new video regarding Forrest Fenn's chase and how Vietnam might tie into all of this, especially considering the story that Forrest wrote, My War for Me, Inside the Thrill of the Chase. Now, I've talked about some of the stuff in this video, well, almost all of it, a couple of times before, but I think that some people might not have completely understood it. So this might be a little bit long, but I'm going to try to make that video again, and this time get involved a little bit more, and hopefully that you'll understand it better. As usual, this is not a solution. I don't claim it to be a solution, and I don't really claim that it's needed for a solution, but I want to run it by you and let you decide that for yourself. I want to warn you up front that a lot of this might be considered special knowledge. Some of it is pretty easy to learn. Certainly, if you ever went to Vietnam as a tourist, you would learn it. But all of this stuff is out there. A lot of it's taken directly from Forrest Fenn's book. But I really don't want to debate whether or not special knowledge is in it or how much would be required. So if you feel that special knowledge is definitely out of the door, then you might want to turn the video off now because you're probably not going to like a lot what's in there. And again, I don't want to debate whether or not it's required. I don't want to debate whether or not this will lead to a solution. What I want to do is explain a theory that might help lead you to a solution and my reasons as to why. And then I kind of want to give you a little bit of education on what happened in Vietnam. Now, hopefully, I don't butcher any of the Vietnamese names. I know I had done so in the past, and I was corrected by Forrest, in fact, on one of my misspellings. But I mean, my mispronunciations. But so I'm going to try to make this as accurate as I can. And, look, I really respect people in our military and what they've done and what they put on the line for our freedom. So that's why I'm trying to make this accurate. But I apologize up front that there may be some things that are incorrect. I'm doing a lot of this based on a lot of research that I've done, but I'm taking a lot of it straight out of my head. I do have a script here with some minor notes, but I don't really have everything scripted. So there may be a mistake here and there, but I think I can still get my general point across. I'm thinking about My War for Me. Forrest has said in the past that if you read anything in Thrill of the Chase, read that story, My War for Me. And obviously, it's one of the largest chapters in his book. And, I mean, come on, he spent 20 years in the military and, he flew all these combat missions. He put his life on the line for us. The least we could do is read that story. And hopefully, here, I'll give you some little bit of historical perspective on what occurs. And to begin with, I want to take it back to where Forrest discusses the Indochina War. And here we are in Vietnam, and here's where Toi Ha, hopefully I pronounced that right, Forrest. If I didn't, I'm sorry. Toi Ha. And Forrest Base was right down here. The Indochina battle took place in South Vietnam, but a primary area where it took place, where the French suffered the most casualties, was right here on a road that leads from an area called Quai Nahan to Pliku. Again, I hope I got that right. This road here is QL 19. QL 19 goes, as I said, from Pliku to Quai Nan. It's roughly 50 plus miles east and on the 109th east longitude line. It's directly north of, Quai Nan is directly north of where Forrest was based at down here when he fought in the Vietnam War. So anyway, some history behind this road and what happened in the French Indochina War. On June 24th, 1954, a group of men known as Groupement Mobile 100 received orders to abandon their defensive positions at a place called An Key. And On Key is over here along QL 19, and it later became known as Sin City during the Vietnam War. But French Indochina War, the French were here, and they were on a defensive position there. They were issued orders to retreat and fall back to their home base, which was in Pleiku, over here. Okay, but unfortunately, they didn't make it. While they were going west on QL 19, approximately near kilometer 15, they were ambushed by the Viet Minh troops belonging to the 803rd Regiment, and they suffered the most heavy losses that they did in the French Indochina War. 1,600 French soldiers died at this ambush, and it was their largest loss. One day later, in fact, is when the French surrendered. This ambush occurred right here. There's a memorial at this location here of those men, okay? But they were ambushed here. This ended up being called Ambush Alley, and it is between An Tan and a place known as Bang Yang Pass, okay? So they were ambushed there, and a lot of smaller ambush always took place here. This road was deadly, right? So they never made it back. Some of them died here. Some of them managed to make it probably up around here, and then they died pretty much. But this is where the biggest one was. The enemy came down along this road and ambushed them right here and over here. Actually, they came down all through this whole area, ambushed them. And what happened after that? A lot of Frenchmen were buried because they weren't yet. A lot of them could not be identified, and there was no plea, I guess, yet to bring them home. So they were all buried primarily all along this road, up around here. But a mass percentage of them were buried in this French military cemetery right here on the top of this. All kinds of French graves. You could see them all over the place up here. And the Frenchmen that they buried were buried in a standing position. That should sound familiar to you because Forrest says they should have buried Skippy standing. Anyway, the French were buried in a standing position facing west towards France. Eventually, a lot of the bodies were recovered and they were later sent back to France, but there's still unidentified remains that are still in various graves, all up around here and also up around a place called Dead Man's Curve, up around here. Okay. And a lot of them you can still see on Google Earth, and they'll appear as white dots because they put lime in there with the corpses to help things decompose faster. That is where, when Forrest talks about flying, up on his bombing missions from his base, he would fly up in this direction, up here on his bombing mission. So he says he would look out of his left wing at 11 o'clock position, and that's where he noticed the waterfall. And eventually, later on, he goes down to that waterfall only to discover that it was a French cemetery. So the chances are extremely high that somewhere up around here is where Forrest went when he went and tripped over those gravestones. Okay. I'll show you now what this monument to the memorial looks like. And, well, the memorial's here. I'm not sure if I have a picture of it. It's here. There's pictures of it online. There's all kinds of signs down here to describe the place. It's called the French Indochina Memorial. Okay. And at the ambush site, there's also a marker, and there's various markers all along here, including south of this road, where they were ambushed. And those markers look like this. One side is written in French, and the other side is written in Vietnamese. There's no English on these markers. There may be one at the historical marker because they would put a plaque or something there so that English-speaking tourists could read what it says. But basically, some of these were large, and then some of them were small. Compared them obelisks they were always an obelisk, but they're small, and a lot of them have bullet holes and stuff in them. Because again, these are from the during a period of war. They were temporary graves all over the place, mainly around Mangang Pass, all along QL 19 where they were ambushed. Okay, so basically, it's relatively close to Forrest Base. And Forrest said that the distance from his base to the location, they flew there in roughly an hour's time or a little bit less. Well, if he flew in a Huey, which was a pretty popular Army helicopter, he did use an Army helicopter. This is about the distance that they would travel in roughly um, 70, 75 to 100% of an hour. Okay. And that would roughly be almost a half a tank of gas. Although I have to point out that along this road by Sin City or On Key, we had a very large army base called Camp Radcliffe. And this is also a helicopter refueling station. So he could have went here and then they could have refueled. Most likely, though, the guy just took off from there with a full tank of gas, went down, picked up Forrest, went back, took him up to here where he wanted to go, and then eventually dropped him off again. I really don't think, although the Huey could have flown all the way up to here with one tank of gas from Forrest Base. Again, consider the fact that they could have refueled here. This is the demilitarized zone. I don't think they would have went north of this line into North Vietnam, complete enemy territory. But you got to remember that all this took place during the Tet Offensive, which I'll get to in a moment. And during the Tet Offensive, there were battles down here in South Vietnam. They weren't necessarily always up to the north. Okay. So anyway, the chances are extremely high that the Forest Special Place in Vietnam with the waterfall and the French graves was right around here. This brown line here is the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and I'll explain that in a minute. And basically, it goes from North Vietnam down to South Vietnam, and it was a supply route that made up of a bunch of roads, dirt roads, and so on and so forth. And there were a lot of battles along there. Okay. So we fast forward now, and in the 1960s, near On Key, QL19, as I explained before, that was where they had Camp Radcliffe. Um, Camp Radcliffe was known as the golf course. They actually constructed a golf course on there, I guess, for the officers. And again, this was a really, really big base. And a lot of battles took a lot of casualties, unfortunately, all around this road. That's why they would have the base here. Now, in 1966, there was what they called Operation Turnkey, and there was no base down by Toy Hall until 1966. They began construction with Operation Turnkey, where they built the Toy Hall Air Base that had a 9,000-foot aluminum runway, and I guess that's kind of like almost like a portable runway that they could move around, but they used it kind of somewhat permanently here. But it was 9,000 feet and it was made out of aluminum. And then they also had a 9,500-foot concrete runway. They used concrete and aluminum, AM-2 aluminum matting, it was called, on the 9,000-foot runway. That was the first runway created. The concrete runway came a little bit later. And I think everything was finished in 1967, a year prior to Forrest coming here. Well, during that same time period, a political organization in South Vietnam known as the Viet Cong, or the People's Liberation Armed Forces, PLAF, are known for a gigantic assault on more than 100 South Vietnamese urban areas in 1968, including attack on many U.S. bases and the U.S. Embassy itself in Saigon. The name of this attack was the Tet Offensive. So basically, you had a bunch of sympathizers, North Vietnamese sympathizers in South Vietnam, and those political groups were attacking the South Vietnamese citizens and the Americans. So that was when Forrest actually enlisted, and he became, helping. He came to help out against the Tet offensive, and many of the attacks during those, as I indicated before, took place along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But really, they blew up bases all over the place, um, including Forrest Fenn's base himself was attacked, and I think he discusses that in the book, or maybe in the online version. I don't know, but needless to say, it was attacked. So Forrest was here for that reason. And whenever Forrest mentions the Ho Chi Minh Trail, that is the trail that he was going on bombing runs. So he was shot down up in Tchepone, here, up in Laos. So he was bombing this trail, and maybe he was bombing around here somewhere. I think he crashed somewhere north, up in a karst. I think somewhere around here, approximately. I don't know, but obviously he names the closest place, which would be Tchepone in Laos. He was shot down north of there. Okay, and he was bombing. I mean, and this brown line is kind of misleading because the Ho Chi Minh Trail was wide. It was a very wide swath down. So Forrest came in during the Tet offensive, and again, his base is one of the ones that were attacked. During the time frame that Forrest was shot down in a bombing mission at Tchepone, QL-19 again was once again under heavy fire. Okay, there was a lot of battles going on down here. I guess mostly with the Army, and the Navy would come in from here, and then Forrest, of course, would be bombing some areas around there too. Most likely, he doesn't explain exactly where he bombed, but QL-19 was always under heavy fire. And during the Vietnam War, it's interesting to note that the westbound convoys that were moving along QL-19 were referred to as Friscos. If they were coming from the east and heading west, they were Friscos. If they were coming from the west and heading east, we referred to them as New Yorkers. But apparently, we got a little bit complacent on this road because, again, we suffered high casualties this time in the Vietnam War along QL-19, all around Mang Yang Pass again. So once again, this becomes a very deadly area during the war. And I guess we kind of forgot about all the French that suffered, the same loss that caused them to surrender in the war because of what happened. So they used, in order to track their flights and to find out where Forrest crashed, they, of course, used radar and they used navigation. Similar to what commercial airlines would use in the United States and worldwide, called VOR beacons and NDBs. Okay, well, the military had their own version of that. And a while back, it's interesting. I had a discussion with Toby about VORs and other flight navigation aids, and I'm not sure why, but Toby said they did not use any forms of VOR in Vietnam. That's completely incorrect, because we had mobile units for war zones that were called Lima sites, which were TACAN sites, TACAN sites, military versions of VOR. And the Lima sites were, I guess, temporary, and they were installed by the United States Air Force so that we could use navigational radar in areas around Laos and other places to communicate, while you're in the air with back at your base. Okay, so many of those sites were named. They're named just like VORs are named in the United States. I talked about these in another video where there's some VORs and there's some stars, and SIDS that have names in them like Goofy or Mickey. And those are all the ones near Disney. They tend to be themed after the area that they're in. Well, the same thing is true in Vietnam and other war sites. They would name these TACAN sites. And in the military documentation, they would have operation names. And in the operations, they would sometimes refer to these TACAN sites by name. Okay, because I guess, nobody on the enemy side is going to know them by name, and they're not permanent sites. Anyway, now that we're on the discussion of operation names, I wanted to mention a couple of interesting things to you. Now, all this stuff can be researched online in the veterans, Vietnam veterans websites, especially like the one at Texas Tech University. And one of the things I want to mention was the 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 1st Cavalry Division. They were known as 2/1, the Blackjack Brigade. It was the Army Cavalry unit of the United States, and they were based in Fort Hood, Texas. But they were a combination of ground and air units. And basically, what they did during one of their operations is they landed pretty much north of where Forrest was, up here in Quy Nhon, and then they moved on ground up to Camp Radcliffe, I guess, to bring supplies, more units, so more men, so on and so forth. Again, this was an extreme hotbed area during the Vietnam War, and it was essentially the area where the French suffered the biggest loss, causing them to surrender the next day. And that all happened here. So again, that's probably where Forrest went to go to the grave. And the operation to land at Quy Nhon was in 1965. They disembarked from the USNS Buckner and landed at Quy Nhon. The brigade was loaded into helicopters and flew inland to the division base camp at Camp Radcliffe in the An Key district. That brigade, I think, was the longest brigade that was there. They were in Vietnam for 68 months, and they were in almost constant conflict with the enemy while they were there for those years. Okay. Now, in Vietnam, like I said before, military operations were given names. There are hundreds of names. There's a huge database of them online. And I looked them over, and some of them caught my interest. One of the ones that caught my interest was one that the 2nd Brigade reconnaissance operation that took place from Plico to An Key, again during QL-19. And it took place in 1966. Guess what the name of that operation was? Lewis and Clark. And you could read about why they called it Lewis and Clark. It was kind of discovery mission, I guess, for them in Vietnam, but it was called Lewis and Clark nonetheless. But the other operations had names such as Manhattan, Treasure Island, Wheeler, Wyoming, Pioneer, Paul Revere, and so on and so forth. But I thought that was very interesting, and I wanted to show you again the Tet Offensive. Here's a picture that shows how it took place, and you can see the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You can see Laos. This is the demilitarized zone. Forest Base. You can see it was attacked here because it's got that red star. Quy Nhon was attacked, and again, this is where the supplies were brought up during QL-19, and that's why we were ambushed there a lot. And here's Saigon. Forrest was once shot down. His first time he was shot down was down here. I have it marked. Yeah, Ben Toy. He was shot down here the first time, and then the second time he was shot down was up here. When he went on the Freedom plane to come home, they left Vietnam from here. And he mentions the names of these places that I'm talking about up here. He doesn't he mentions some of these places. I don't think he mentions anything along QL-19. But you could figure it out just by reading the descriptions of the flights that he took and doing a history of like, where did the most French die? Where was he likely to find a French grave? When the French surrendered, they went up here and they were up here in North Vietnam. They surrendered. Actually, that's not Vietnam, I don't think. Anyway, that's where the French surrendered the Indochina War, and this is where Forrest left Vietnam from. I wanted to do a discussion here briefly about Forrest mentions the word lines a lot in scrapbooks. He mentions it in Thrill of the Chase. And I want to read a couple of things to you here where he discusses lines. And I'll give you the source too. This is from the Thrill of the Chase in My War for Me. And he says, so in my mind, these lines have converged to tell a story that satisfies me in my heart. We're only there, it really counts. I justify expressing my thoughts here because they have been pounding at me for so long. I certainly can't identify all of the lines that spun the web that forms the latent beliefs that brought me here, but these are some. Okay. And then he, of course, in the rest of the story, he gives those places. Here's another source, and this is a Business Insider interview. Read the clues in my poem over and over and study the map of the Rocky Mountains. Try to marry the two. The treasure is right out there waiting for the person who can make all the lines cross in the right spot. Here's another one. This is on 6 Questions, Mysterious Writings. I had written 7 books before this one, and it seemed that none of the lines crossed where they were supposed to, metaphorically speaking. Another one, source of mysterious writings, featured question. He says, heck, Shannon, you just widened one of my largest fault lines. In my haste to get back to the helicopter and leave that place, my effort was expended trying to remember the inscription, and I repeated it over and over. In that process, the soldier's name was not retained. So he's talking about fault lines. He's talking about memorizing the plate that was on the French grave that he discovered in Vietnam. Here's another one. This again is Mysterious Writings. I have many regrets, Matt, and to reveal a few, I have to expose one of my fault lines. There he goes again. Here's another one. There are a few fault lines in my aptitudes. That was in scrapbook 124. Here's scrapbook 107. I'll just stay home and keep my eye on the telephone lines. All right. So, and here's another one, and I want you to pay particular attention to this one. And this was on Jenny's site again, and it was posted in 2014, July. Okay. Somebody wrote, Dear Forrest, you tell us that we should find where warm waters halt before trying to solve any of the other clues. Imagining that we haven't seen the rest of the poem and all we have to go on is begin at where warm waters halt and somewhere in the mountains north of Santa Fe, do you think that we can confidently determine the starting place for your treasure trail? Steve. Forrest responds, no. If that's all you have to go on are those 2 clues, you cannot proceed with confidence. Look at it this way. If you were making a cake and you left out a few ingredients, would you achieve your goal? Now here comes the important part. Listen to what he says next. Your question reminds me of another. You leave home and walk a straight line for a mile. You turn 90 degrees left and you walk a curved line for a mile and shoot a bear. Then you turn 90 degrees left again and walk a straight line back to your home. What color is the bear? F. Well, let me show you what he's doing there. What he's doing is basically he's describing a triangle on a sphere. Okay. So if you left home and you walked a straight line and then you made a 90-degree turn and walked on a curved line, and then you made another left turn and walked another line, curved line, you would end up home. Okay. So he's basically defining, imagine that this sphere is the Earth. He's defining how spherical coordinates would work. And I'm going to get back to that in a second, but I want to bring up something that we had discussed in the past before, which was translating or mirroring coordinates. Okay. I believe that it's possible to solve the poem clues in Vietnam. Okay. And then translate the coordinates from Vietnam. And another word for translate would be mirror those coordinates from Vietnam over to the United States. Then go to those same positions. And what do you see there? Do you see anything that might give you an idea of an answer for any of the clues? That's the beginning of warm water salt, no place for the meek, and so on and so forth. You know, I don't know if you have done that. I've done that many times, and I've discussed it before. But I wanted to show you this graphic here because he could be describing it again. So let me show you another picture. So here we go to one that I've edited. So here's the North Pole, okay? And if we do that same thing that he described, and we plot, just for now, we plot Toy Hall and Kirwin, Wyoming is where we would end up if we took 109 east. That's the 109 east longitude line right here, 109 east, okay? If we merely take the coordinates of the longitude of where he was based and we swap west into the position of east. So in other words, let's come down. We go up 109 east to the pole. We'll come down 109 west. Okay. And remember, I don't mention the anything other than degrees here. But if you take the degrees, minutes, and seconds, and even hundreds of seconds of Toi Hoa, where he was based, and then you go to translate that coordinate by swapping east with west, you end up exactly over Kirwin. And this is not new news. This was pointed out by a guy named O. He posted it on various boards years ago. But one thing I think he got hung up in thinking that the chest is in Kirwin. But again, if you look at Kirwin, and I'm going to go, this would be downtown Toy Hall. Okay. And it's interesting to note that this is the original site of Kirwin. You'll notice that there's some buildings up around here. That's not Kirwin. Because in order to get to Kirwin, you had to cross the water over here. Okay. This is Kirwin. And this spot is identical to, as far as the longitude, is identical to, there we go. I'm probably going to edit some of these jumps out that you see here just to make it. But anyway, that spot is identical to here. Now, I don't think Forrest gave us, I think he mentioned Toi Hoa, even though his base was here, because in order to keep things simple in the book, he's going to mention places where they're marked on the map. Okay. You'll see Toi Hoa's map there, and then you'll see this town's mapped here. This town is mapped right there. And the same thing with Tchepone. I tried to map him exactly where he was. And you'll find that, like I said, the only difference between the position of this and the position of Kirwin is obviously the latitude. Toy Hall sits at about 13 north latitude. Okay. And Kirwin is at about 44 or 43, 44 north latitude. All right. Now, one thing I want to point out about that is if you take the difference in latitude from Kirwin, Wyoming, to where he was based, it comes out to almost 32 degrees of latitude. Now think about, what does the number 32 degrees mean to you? Well, 32 degrees is the freezing point of water. Could 32 be the home of brown, or have something to do with translating the home of brown? Because remember, giving us the latitude was easy. All he had to do was mention, mirror it. And in fact, the word in the poem where it says, if you've been wise, a lot of people in the past have interpreted wise to mean west is east. So you're swapping, you're mirroring them, okay? And now if you mirror those coordinates of all of those points that I've discussed over here, including where he was shot down, and mirror him exactly the way I talked about, just literally change east to west. For the latitudes, you're going to have to do a little bit of work. You're going to have to factor in the difference between the latitudes of the two places and essentially add it. But here's where those areas come in. Here's Queensland, would be here, just outside of Cody, okay? Northeast, okay? Pleiku, which would be the western end, now becomes the eastern end of QL19, would be somewhere near the Medicine Wheel in the Bighorn Range, okay? Mang Yang Pass would be, and the French Graves would be somewhere near Lovell, Wyoming, okay? And the French would have been ambushed somewhere around here, okay? And On Key would have been somewhere around here, which puts the military base of Camp Radcliffe right around here, okay? Right around Powell. And we all know that one of the hints, or, well, one of the aberrations on the map that's in Too Far to Walk is that Ralston is the only place that has a dot with no name on the map. Every other place that has a dot has a name. So that would either be, it's either going to be Powell or it's going to be Ralston, one of these two. I think it's Ralston, but it could be Powell. Either way, that's close to here, and the Medicine Wheel is close to here. So if Forrest were to fly out from his base in Kirwin, instead of flying west, if you translate those coordinates, he would have been flying east up in this direction, okay? So he would have flown there, or he would have flown, and that would be under his 11 o'clock wing, up all areas up around here, okay? If he were shot down in the United States, unfortunately, this area is out of bounds, but he would have been shot down right here. This is where Tchepone would have been, which is only at 2,400 feet, okay? But it's interesting that it flies over this location. And this is exactly where the Battle of Little Bighorn took place. And this is where the cabin from Joseph Henry Smith came from. Forrest took it off. He bought it when he bought the rest of Joseph Henry Sharp's estate. And they moved the cabin from its location here at the confluence of the Little and Little Bighorn and the Bighorn Rivers, right here. Okay. And they moved it, of course, into Cody, which is over here. So now the cabin's over here. So it's really interesting when you come up with these places, okay? But all I did to get them, like again, is I translated the latitude by adding the difference between Kirwin or Wyoming, let's say, and where Toy Ho is. It's 32 degrees approximately. So if you take all of the locations in Vietnam and you translate them, they all come up around here. Now you added 32 on the swap. But what if you're not supposed to just swap east and west? Suppose he only wants you to swap east and west to establish Kirwin, but you're still supposed to fly west. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that these places here, if I instead calculated the vectors from Vietnam of his westerly travel, that would take all of these points and slap them all into Yellowstone around here. Okay. And it's very interesting because Mang Yang Pass, for example, would end up being somewhere between. Now, this is where they took a picture of Skippy on page 56 in The Thrill of the Chase. He's standing next to a big rock. Okay. He's down here. Now, if you look at over here, this is where the spiral bridge is called the Loop. It's at Sylvain Pass. This is the pass, the tallest point that you have to go across when you're coming from Cody into the east entrance. This is the area that Forrest traveled every time they went to and from Yellowstone. But before Forrest time, down here, they don't use it anymore, but there was a trestle bridge here, a corkscrew bridge that would raise you in elevation up to a point where you could come out. I think it was right around here, and you would end up coming out around here, and then eventually would go back up to the current road, which is up high. That spiral bridge, I'm sure many of you know about it. It's the corkscrew bridge. It was in use from 1904 to 1919. It's right there. It's called the Sylvain Pass. Okay, and it was a corkscrew bridge. One thing a corkscrew does is ever draw nigh, by the way. So these are the cars that would be, ascending and descending into the canyon. And this is here is showing the grade. Here's a picture of it back in its day. There you go. It's no longer in use. It's still there. I think that's pretty much all the pictures I want to show you. Oh, and of course, here's Skippy at that rock. This was taken at the spot that I just showed you in there. And all of this picture hint, and even the Grebe Lake hint, all of the ones that you see in The Thrill of the Chase, they're interesting because, and I didn't do that here. I do have it, and I'm not going to put it there because that's an exercise for you. I've given you enough here to show you and explain what you have to do. So basically, instead of just changing east to west, you're changing east to west to get back to his home base in Kirwin. But from there, take the same flights that he took, and map out where they are. Where is Mang Yang Pass? Where is all of these places? The French and the China. Where would the graves have been over here? Where were the French ambushed? And one thing you're going to find that's very similar is this road, Highway 20, that goes in and out of Yellowstone. This is the Buffalo Bill Cody Scenic Byway, which begins here at the gate to Yellowstone, and it ends here technically. But the online brochures and pamphlets actually would describe places all the way from Cody right up here until you get in, including the corkscrew, probably right up to Fishing Bridge, which is over here, which is where Forrest stayed for the first 10 years or so of going there before his father became a principal, which is when his father built cabins out here. Before that, only his grandfather had a cabin out here, and they stayed mostly in Fishing Village, the tent cities. And he talks about that in his interviews, so there's no reason to get to it. But anyway, when you're in Vietnam, what you want to do is, and by the way, it would turn out, if he was shot down here, it would turn out that he would have been shot down somewhere around here. And that might be interesting for some of you people that are looking up in Montana. But I don't think where he was shot down is a special place. This is out of range. Okay. This is in search area. But I think a special place is he says it was a special spot until he found out that it was a graveyard. I think it's down here in Yellowstone because all of these points are in Yellowstone. In fact, it's interesting because this whole area up here would be this would all be Laos. I'm sorry, where he was shot down in the jungle up there. And the demilitarized zone would have been somewhere around here, probably around close to the Canadian border, actually, up by Glacier National Park. So there's more stuff for you to think about. But basically, what you need to do in order to do that is come back over here, okay? And what you want to do is get his base, just use Toyoa. Don't use the airport because he mentions Toyoa. He doesn't mention coordinates anywhere in the book, okay? So use Toyoa and measure the angle and distance that he went, to the point. Where did he crash? Measure the distance and the angle. Okay. Where is the place he mentions? Where is the places I'm mentioning here? Like Dead Man's Curve, the French military cemetery, Manging Pass. Okay. Measure the angle. Okay. And then take that angle and that distance and swing it around so that you're flying out of Kirwin on that same trajectory. Okay. And you're going to be really surprised where some of those points land. They're all within here. I don't think any of them leave the Yellowstone border, except for where he was shot down, which I said is up closer to Glacier National Park, is where that would be. So, and again, the spherical coordinates. Obviously, if I was going to fly from Kirwin to Vietnam, I wouldn't fly directly west because that would be like 12,000 miles. That would be ridiculous. Airplanes don't do that. What I would do is I would fly north. I would fly a curve. Again, that's where these spherical coordinates come in. This would also relate to the ball of string that Forrest discusses. Maybe he's talking about using a ball of string to string lines from points to points that he mentions in the book and in his stories. Connect the two, okay? You want to connect them umbilically, okay? So anyway, you could take that line and then bring it down to various places. Bring it down to where he was based, okay? Bring it down to where he was shot down, okay? And just for grins and giggles, see what happens. Connect places up. And you'll see that line is less than 8,000 miles. So because he's flying north, again, remember this here, he's flying this trajectory and it's going to be less distance than this, okay? And the hint that he gives you is in that scrapbook where he's telling you to go 90 degrees on a curve, 90 degrees on a curve, back down where you started. And then he says, what color was the bear? Or something about the bear. That doesn't mean anything. What he's describing to you is spherical coordinates. Okay. This is not two-dimensional geometry. You can't use straight lines on an Earth. Right. So to me, that's a hint that you're going to have to translate things. So anyway, look where that line takes you. If you go to where he was shot down. Interesting, isn't it? Right through there. Actually, if you connect up to where his base is, it takes you, I think, somewhere around here, close to where his cabin was in West Yellowstone. But I believe when he's talking about lines, that he's talking about possibly connecting the places that he describes in the book. Okay. Now, let me mention some other things of interest to you, just some definitions. And you can take it for what it's worth. Let's see. The word pass, like Manging Pass, Sylvain Pass, the definition is the act of passing. Passage through a barrier, to run, extend, or lead through, over or across a place. Now let's look at some of the Vietnam names. I don't know if any of them would refer to hints in the poem. That's up to you to decide. But let's look at Plico Gai Lai, which is the western edge of QL 19. Okay. It is the capital of the Gai Lai province, but its meaning, when translated roughly, is to detain a suspect, a high village, or a tall village. Okay. Mang Yang, that means among the bright, positive, masculine. Okay. On key, in a loose translation to India, means burning, to be burnt. A better translation might be gentle peace. Okay. Kui Nan means seaport or precious piercing. Toi Ha means drawn, Drawn. Toi Ha, draw, drawing nigh. I don't know. Now, remember the girl in Borders? Okay. She had braided hair. She took her braids and she swung them side to side as if they had purpose. Well, who wears braids? Indians do. A lot of Indian tribes. The Shoshone, they wore porcupine quills as braids. And the Shoshone men and women both wore their hair either loose or in two long braids. Could Forrest be talking about the Shoshone National Forest, which is all through here, actually down the here? And also, there's two borders to that forest. There's the border, western border of the Shoshone National Forest is here, and the eastern border is here. So you cross two borders when you leave. While he's in there, you're swinging your braids, hinting at Indians, possibly. I don't know. Or Forrest has mentioned porcupines and porcupine quills. Could it be as simple as that? I think Forrest uses descriptive areas to describe what you will see, and he doesn't name places directly. However, that doesn't mean that he's not writing a poem that describes places in Vietnam, and it's your job to make the connection to the United States. Now, if you take the 109 comes down, like I said, through Kirwin. It comes down, and it doesn't really contain any of Colorado. It's kind of right on the line, and then when it gets down to New Mexico, same thing. It's west of New Mexico. 109 is not even within New Mexico. So right there, that would rule out a lot of stuff unless you're doing an east-west translation. But again, the reason for me going up to Wyoming is 32 degrees is the freezing point of water. So if you add 32 degrees to the locations, that's all an exercise for you. So anyway, that's really all I had to say about this, and I hope this video makes things more clear. I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm sorry for the length of it, and again, I'm sorry if I made any mistakes, and I know Forrest will probably kill me if I still didn't pronounce Toy Hall correctly. But I'm trying to be as accurate as I can here, and I'm trying not to get into too much history, and I'm trying to present it in such a way that you can easily understand this. And the majority of the stuff I'm talking to you about is in Forrest's book. And just like you might have to do a little bit of research about people like Hemingway, you're only going to need a short bio or a very short synopsis of a story to be able to determine what I'm talking about. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to find out about Camp Radcliffe or QL-19 or the Tet Offensive, which he mentions in his book, the Tet Offensive, and and the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And when you find that, you're going to discover that. Now, if you make the east and west connection, which is also hinted at in the book, and I'm not going to explain where. There's some stuff that I'm going to leave up to you because, again, I'm not trying to present a solution here. And to be quite honest, there's some stuff that I've discovered that I just don't want to give out yet. But you might be able to extrapolate it if you put forth the effort into what I'm talking about. And I think you're going to be surprised. And either way, it's kind of a fun thing to do. I certainly enjoyed it. And to kind of pay respects for the men and women who serve our country, and also the French and other people in the world who have served their countries, pay a little respect and learn a little bit of history about what they went through. Unfortunately, knowing history doesn't always prevent us from making the same mistakes. And in 1967 and 68, we made the same mistakes that the French made during the Indochina War. And I think that Forrest is trying to indicate that. And he wants us to learn about that. That was a huge part of his life, certainly his turning point, you know. And I think when he says umbilically tied, he's talking about taking the thrill of the chase and kind of tying his life stories together. And the idea to map them here, if you watch the Collected Works interview with Forrest, I don't remember exactly which point, but at some point, Douglas Preston says, "Hey, I wonder if you would take, and he was talking about not the thrill of the chase, but Too Far to Walk. I wonder what happened if you plotted all the points from those stories that he's talking about on a map. Would that help us?" When he says that, take a good look at Forrest's face and Forrest's body language in the video. So there's another thing for you to look at. So if O ever sees this again, I thanked him before for discovering that 109 was tied to Forrest's base in Vietnam. But my word to him would be, try to forget about Kirwin for the moment and look at the bigger picture, because although the chest could be at Kirwin, we don't know that, but I think that such tight focus on Kirwin is removing him from the bigger picture, and he's not seeing all the other connections that exist. And Forrest also mentions a lot of places by name on the East Coast that he flew after he got back from Vietnam, when he was going back through his memory. And he talks about putting his thumb over Vietnam and stuff like that. I think a lot of that stuff might even refer to the same area. Certainly, he says his left thumb. Well, your left thumb would be your west thumb, right? So could he be referring to west thumb here in Yellowstone? No. Go figure. Anyway, and in order for you to precisely go with confidence to the chest, I think that it's going to require a lot of work. If you want to just look at a map and play guessing games at where warm waters halt, that's up to you. I just hope you have the cash to back up all the trips you're going to take while you're wandering up and down streams, because I believe that it takes more than that. And I could be totally wrong, and maybe this is too complicated. But again, that's up for you to decide, and you had fair warning. So I don't want to hear any of that stuff. If you want to discuss things in the comments, I'd be more interested in discussions as to maybe I missed something, or what do you see in regards to this? Do you see a way to improve it? That's the kind of stuff that I'm really interested to see. I don't want to debate special knowledge. You can take that debate somewhere else, because I'm just going to delete your comment if that's what you do. Anyway, have a great day. Peace.